This video has over 50 conifers for different uses in the garden. Some of them are low, like this Dragon Prince cryptomeria, which is going to start the video off. Some of them are screening plants. Some of them are super interesting plants that you can form into all kinds of shapes and sizes, but these are all great garden plants. This is Cryptomeria japonica Dragon Prince from the Southern Living Plant Collection. This is an incredible, super compact, ornamental conifer that can be kept between 2 to 3 feet in height, maybe 3 to 4 feet in width in time. This one has been in the ground for about 4 years. It's never been pruned. It's only been fertilized once a year with an organic fertilizer back in February, March every year. Don't have to lay a blade on it to keep it just this really beautiful, compact dome shape that it has. When it's initially leafing out in the spring or new foliage is coming on it in the spring, it has kind of a limey green color to it, and then it settles into this really great darker green color. Like other Cryptomeria, it's fine textured and it's pretty soft to the touch. You know, other conifers will kind of bite you back if you're messing around with them. So another reason it makes a great ornamental. This is a great plant for low foundations, great plant for containers. They're hardy in zone 6 to 9, and if you're in zone 6, I'd put it in a slightly protected space in a 6A for sure. The rest of us can use it wherever we want to in the garden, but really a very versatile plant for low foundations, accent plant, really great mixed with other types of texture, other leaf colors, other textures in the garden, and just one of my favorite ornamental plants because it's been in the ground 4 years. It looks like this, and we've done nothing to it. So again, this is Dragon Prince Cryptomeria. This is green penguin Scots pine, or Pinus sylvestris green penguin. It was found as a selection of seedlings of Pinus sylvestris. This is native to Scotland and then Norway, Sweden, you know, that area of the world. So it's extremely cold tolerant. Hardy in zones 3 to 7, but we are in zone 8 in Raleigh, and we've just kind of used some living mulch to keep the roots cool during the summer. Needs full sun, but this is one of the lowest maintenance plants in our Raleigh garden, and we've used it as kind of an entryway piece into the garden because it's so interesting. It kind of has this little penguin shape to it. 10 years, it'll be 4 or 5 feet in height, but super narrow. Again, if you're growing it in warmer areas, I would definitely, you know, make sure it's well mulched at a minimum because it does need the more sun the better, full sun ideally. But in warmer areas, I would encourage you to put, you know, some sort, you know, we've got this variegated sedum on one side and this annual vinca on the other to keep the roots cool on it, because this one's getting 8-10 hours of direct sun every day during the summer. It'll grow about 3 to 5 inches a year. Really tolerant of a lot of soil types, but not tolerant of wet feet at all. So mound it up a bit when you plant it, or plant it on a bit of a slope. If you're putting it as a container plant, which it's a great choice for a container, make sure it's a really well-draining soil mix. And outside of that, this is a really great plant to add something unique into your garden that most people won't recognize, but they'll definitely want to know what it is. This is green penguin pine. This is a Thuja occidentalis called yellow ribbon. So it's an upright, narrow Thuja occidentalis. Occidentals are native to the northeast United States and up into Canada. So they are native to North America, but really in much, much colder areas. Steph and I have seen these out in the areas where they're native to, in the woods up in Canada, and way, way north in New York. So I'm going to say they're hardy in zone 3 to 7, but if we can grow them in zone 8, we just have to have a little bit of afternoon shade on them. Soft to the touch, very fastigiate upright growth habit on yellow ribbon, similar to highlights. So if you saw highlights, they're going to get similar growth habit. I think highlights gets taller though. This one I've seen this one, like 8 to 10 feet in height, something like that. So, but probably going to get bigger than that. There's no off switch for these conifers, so I'm guessing it's going to continue to add height. But I think you could hold it 8 to 10 feet, maybe 3 to 4 feet in width down at the bottom. And it has this new chartreuse color anytime it's actively growing. So here we are filming this right at the beginning of April, and it's starting to put that new growth on, and you can see how showy it is. And it'll be like this all season long. This is a really neat Thuja occidentalis called bowling ball. you're gonna see on tags it gets 30 inches tall, something like that. Obviously, this one's in a 7-gallon container. It's almost that tall already. So I think it will get a little bit taller than that in the ground. So let's say 3 to 4 by 3 to 4 ultimately, but can be kept smaller. I think the most interesting thing, just like other Thuja occidentalis, which are native to North America, they're soft to the touch. But the big characteristic for me about this plant is how it holds its color year round. So I'm filming this at the beginning of April, and a lot of these Thuja occidentalis dwarfs like this will turn rust colors, burgundy colors, all kinds of things during the winter time. And this one keeps this beautiful kind of lime green color right through the winter. As it flushes out in the spring, it'll have kind of a chartreuse new growth to it. I don't want to call it that, but it is a light green coloration in the new growth. So it's changeable during that time of year. But I just love this thing. It's super, super soft. You can shear it in the late winter if you want to kind of control the size on it a bit. Not a great plant at letting you know when it's dry. And so this one is definitely one. If that top couple inches of soil is dry, you definitely need to be watering this plant to keep it in good shape. Super, super cold tolerant. Almost everybody north of, I'm filming this in zone 8A, everybody north of us can definitely grow this plant. If you're in zone 8, you definitely want to keep an eye on the watering and maybe have it in some place where it gets late day shade. Early morning sun, midday sun, late day shade is probably the ideal place for this. This is a blue star juniper, Juniperus squamata. Is the species of this. This is one I've used for years. I grew these at my nursery, a little slower growing than some other ground cover junipers. So what you're looking at here is these are standard. So they've been trained up into this position. Sometimes some of these conifers will be grafted onto something like this, but I think these were actually trained upright like this. Typically, you're going to see this plant as a garden plant about 2 feet in height, something like that, and a little wider, and used as a ground cover, basically. Not in the ground cover sense of like blue rug or blue Pacific that crawl all over the ground, but more as a very low, compact, very, very low growing compact shrub. Almost, but they will get wider than tall in time. And you can see this is the growth habit. This is the actual normal growth habit, but typically it's down at the ground level. But this one's been limbed up into a tree. These are probably, I don't know how much you would pay for one of these at retail. I might want to, I actually want to take one of these home to the garden. What I like about this species is it's kind of softer. A lot of junipers are fairly prickly, but these are not. These are hardy in, I think, zone 4 to 8. They have this incredible blue hue. We don't have the opportunity to grow a lot of great blue junipers in the south, and this one is definitely zone 8 hardy. I grew it and planted it in Raleigh, and you can grow it in Charlotte and Atlanta and other zone 8 areas. Has this great blue hue year round, and again, just one of my absolute favorite all-time junipers. Pretty easy to grow. Make sure you're keeping them watered if it's abnormally dry at any time. Doesn't like wet feet, but it also doesn't like to get super, super dry either. So that's Blue Star Juniper. This is a Cedrus atlantica called Hortsman. Cedrus atlantica is one of the actual species of cedar. We have a lot of things we call cedars that aren't cedars, but this is one of the actual cedar species. And these are really southern conifers, and this is one of the blue ones that we can actually add to our gardens in the south, and it really remains truly blue like this. This is going to be a slow growing conifer. It might reach 8 to 10 feet in height over 10 years, something like that. It can be sheared on and be cut into kind of a Christmas tree shape if you want to, or you can let it just kind of take on whatever character. We'll see other Cedrus atlanticas that are weeping and are shaped into all kinds of things. Are really interesting what you can do with some of these cedars and the selections of some of these actual cedars. But I love this plant just because, again, we can have this blue foliage, hardy in zone 6 to 9, this blue foliage in the deep south. Another one you want to keep an eye on watering if it's abnormally dry for any length of time. We've got this is one of those things. This is a Frankie boy that we have in our garden in Raleigh, and look how good this blue looks with this chartreuse color. So, if you're looking for companion planting, this is the kind of specimen plant that you put on your cart at the garden center, and you roll it around on the cart and find things, that make it, that really make it stand out in the garden. This is a Procumbens nana juniper. This one is actually a standard. It's been either limbed up or grafted like this to be an interesting specimen plant in the garden. But typically we buy these in 1 gallon or 3 gallon containers as ground cover plants. And I've always been drawn to Procumbens nana, you know, where we think about blue rug and blue Pacific being very low growing to the ground and kind of uniform in growth. This one tends to have a little bit more character to it overall. It's one that is frequently used for bonsai. So you can get this to look like it's a little wind-blown, wind-swept tree. If we follow any of the videos that we've done down at Ram and Tom Giberson's house, she loves this plant. She uses this plant a lot, and in her Asian gardening around her waterfalls, water features, and that kind of thing, this plant is the perfect plant for that, because it has character, right? So it's a ground cover juniper, and we can use it just as a ground cover, but I think its place in the garden is really, you know, if you have a rock, or you know, have several rocks and you grow this one and where it crawls over them, and it just has interest, it has a lot of character to it. So that's what I would say about it. Almost everybody watching can grow this plant. This one grows in zone 4 to 9. So again, this would be a very expensive version of one of these, because it's on a standard like this. But typically you're going to see these in like 1 gallon containers. And if you're shopping for a ground cover juniper, and you don't need to necessarily just cover it just completely, you're just looking for something low along a path edge, around rocks, a water feature, that kind of thing, this is the perfect plant for that. Very common screening plant that gets sold all over the place is Emerald arborvitae. This is a named selection of Thuja occidentalis, which is our native arborvitae to the northeast United States and up into Canada, but really way north of even Pennsylvania, and then very high areas up in the Appalachian Mountains, where these things are actually from. But they're sold throughout, you know, anywhere in the eastern part of the country, and I'm sure in western parts of the country as well. These are been obviously pretty sheared to keep them this narrow. They grow upright and narrow like this, but this is narrow to the extreme, right, where they've allowed a leader to form, but then they've been shearing them on the sides here to keep them narrow. So you can put these in a very narrow space, but you'll have some ongoing shearing that you'll have to do that. Otherwise, these will thicken up and be a little bit thicker in time. But great soft to the touch conifers. Don't trust these during really hot, dry periods of time. When I say they're native to literally north of Pennsylvania. And so be thinking about the fact that if it's 95 plus for a few weeks in the summertime, we see these get lost, and even old established screens where a few of these will die pretty quickly. And they're not really good at letting us know. Like if you were really good at recognizing it, you could see that, you know, that the color changes a bit in that growth on them when they're dry. But if you're not paying attention to it at all, really quickly they can succumb to drought related issues. So great plant, soft to the touch conifer. You can use it in a narrow space if you're willing to commit to some, you know, to some shearing on them in the future. And they can even be top pruned. We see them up in Canada, literally people making hedges out of them and keeping 7 or 8 feet tall, permanently 7 or 8 feet tall, just topping them out as well. So a lot of options with this plant. But again, when it's hot and dry, this is one you're going to put at the top of your list for making sure you're watering them. This is green giant arborvitae, which is actually a hybrid between 2 species. Very vigorous grower, very common now as a screening plant. It's probably slightly overtaken. Leyland cypress is kind of the large growing, Christmas tree shaped, but very large growing conifers in our landscapes now. And you see rows and rows of them. Again, I recommend using some sort of mixed screen just in case something happened to something in the future. You wouldn't lose all of your screening plants, but this is one that we've seen lined up like soldiers, where people put 20 or 50 of them, you know, and hedge themselves off. They will become very large in time. So you're talking about a plant that, you know, can get 50 plus feet probably in the future. And, you know, if they ever did fall down from wind or snow or something like that, it would probably be very expensive to clean those up. So if you don't need something that's necessarily 40 or 50 feet tall, I might discourage it a little bit. If you do though, you do, because occasionally I'll do consultations. Somebody has a neighbor with a 3-story house next to them, and there's not really a great way to figure out how to block those windows, you know, window to window, third floor. This is the plant for that. they're shearing these pretty tight, but in the ground in the future, you could expect them to get between 10 and 15 feet in width for sure, maybe a little wider if you're not doing any kind of pruning on them at all as they get taller and taller. So 50 feet tall and 15 to 20 feet in width, ultimately, if they were never really pruned on. They're great plants. Again, I think some shearing initially, I wouldn't cut the leader out of it unless you want to try to size. You could height control it that way probably, but if you're trying to have them big, I wouldn't cut the leader out of them, but you can do a little bit of shearing on them initially if you want them to be fuller in the future, but otherwise just, you know, leave them alone, let them go. These will grow 3 or 4 feet in a single season, but not that first season. So set your expectations for any of these shrubs where it's not going to grow a whole lot the first year potentially, and then the second year maybe 6 inches, and then the third year maybe 2 feet, and then eventually really start the engine pick up and they can grow 3 or 4 feet in a single season in the future. But that's green giant arborvitae. Here's a crop of gold mop cypress, and they've actually have these under a little bit of shade where they're growing them, and then they'll take the shade cloth off and they'll finish them in more sun, so they'll get much brighter coloration on them, because these get planted in the sun in the landscape. I said this before and I'll say it again, it's kind of funny because there are folks that want the gold mops that only get this tall, and then people that want the gold mops that get this tall. It's all the same plant. This plant will get as big as you want to let it get, up to 20 feet in height if you want to let it get 20 feet in height. But most people, I think, are going to use this. So this could go in a lot of different videos, right? I could put this on low foundation plants because it could absolutely be kept 3 or 4 feet as a little round fluffy ball that's, you know, lacy, soft to the touch. I could put it in a specimen plant video, right, where you'd put this on the corner of your foundation and let it get kind of tall and narrow and wispy. I could put it as a screening plant video. I could put it as a small screening plant video, like all kinds of things that you can do with this plant. And you can just size control it, prune it however you want to prune it, or put it in a place where you can let it get big and let it really take on, you know, basically almost becoming like a small ornamental tree in your landscape. But I love this plant. It's soft to the touch. It's easy. The more sun, the more color. Again, they're growing these in a tiny bit of shade, that's the reason you're seeing them not as bright as you normally would in my videos, if that's how it's showing up. The ones that are over here a little bit have a little bit more sun on them, and you can see a little bit more color on them. So they'll take this shade cloth off and they'll just color right up, and they'll send them out to retail, and they'll be beautiful gold mops on the tables. This is a gold thread cypress called Paul's Gold. You may know Gold Mop is the other one it's been around forever that's similar to this. This one is more heat tolerant. That was what was selected for. So these are hardy in zone 5 to 8, but you know, they're quite a bit more overall heat tolerant. And we've had one in a container at the house for maybe 3 years now. It's such a great container plant with this soft foliage and the weeping habit, and you can see how great it looks in the winter time here. I mean, this is February as we're shooting this, and it's super bright pop of color out here, and I think it's holding its color a little better than when we saw some gold mops we were shooting yesterday. I think it's hold on to that yellow color just a bit better, so that may have been part of the selection as well, differentiating this one from gold mop. They'll get as big as you want them, let them get. So here's one. These are in the Southern Living Plant Collection. So in the Southern Living Plant Collection container, you can see how nice and full and round that plant is. You can shear this off and hold it probably at this height or a little bit bigger for years and years and years. Or you can just start to let it grow, and it will slowly creep up in kind of a pyramidal habit. So these have been obviously sheared off to be more roundish, but their natural growing habit is a little more like this. So if you just leave it be, it'll just keep creeping up, and it'll creep up as long as you want to let it keep growing. I had a 6-foot version of this beside my deck at the old house, and I cut it down to 3 feet. It didn't have anything on it whatsoever after I cut it, and it just flushed right back out from that. So they're actually resettable as well, which not a lot of conifers. Not all conifers are that way by any stretch of the imagination, but this one can be reset in the future. But this is Paul's Gold, false cypress or Chamaecyparis. Really great plant, and we've been super impressed with the heat tolerance in our Raleigh garden. This is a prostrate plum yew or Japanese plum yew. These come in fastigiate selections that are straight up and down, and then ones that get 2 to 3 feet and 3 to 4 feet. This plant has a lot of different shapes and sizes, but this prostrate plum yew we will frequently see on, I would say, the majority of shade gardens that we cover in the Southeast. If they have dry shade or a bank or a slope or somewhere where it's not staying evenly moist throughout the season, these prostrate plum yews are going to be used. And it's just such a great plant for that, for covering up some ground in a difficult, maybe a space that has some root competition in shade or park shade conditions. Super, super slow growing. So this is one of those plants I like to say occasionally, there's a reason this is going to cost more than other things. I've rooted these things and had them take 2.5 years or more to fill a 1 gallon container. And so this is a 3 gallon, a squat 3 gallon container. From a rooted cutting, this could be as much as 3 to even 4 years to have a finished 3 gallon container. It's not a lot of work out here because they're not demanding, and they won't be demanding for you either in the ground. Really super, super low maintenance plant. In the future, it may get a little wider than you want it. It's going to be a while, but if it ever does, you can just prune this thing back and shape it back into, narrow it back in with a pair of pruners pretty much any time, spring or early summer, without any problem. I always say things that are drought tolerant, like this one is, you do need to keep an eye on it to start with. I mean, if you're putting it in an area with root competition, it's going to take a minute for it to get rooted into place. But once it is, this is a really, really great plant. And what I really love, and what Steph and I really love about this plant, is the texture it offers. A lot of things that we put in shady spaces are going to have big, like palmate leaves, like a fatsia or something like that. And you imagine you take something that's tropical looking like that and you put it with something that's soft textured looking like this. And this thing actually is soft to the touch. Looks kind of spiny probably in the video, but it's actually soft to the touch. You put those things together and create those contrast and these different shades of green that we can have in shady spaces, and you can really make a shady space pop, with or without flowers. Here's a wildly popular screening plant for the last 40 years or so. This is a Leyland cypress. Very, very fast growing, evergreen. We'll see, I think, more green giant arborvitae have replaced these over time. They've had some issues. They tend to be slightly shallow rooted, and so we have some uplifting on them once they get into, this thing can get 50 plus feet. And I remember a book that I had looked at a long time ago just about plants, and in the book it said these got like 12 feet or something like that, 12 to 15 feet, because it was like looking at the original one or something. And then I saw a second edition of that same book and it said 50 feet plus. So at that point, it very quickly realized that this plant gets big, 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 and it can grow 3 to 4 feet a year once it gets established. They tend to hold their color really, really well in the wintertime. So what I will say, when they're sitting next to green giants here in the nursery, the green giants tend to have this amber color during the wintertime, where the Leylands tend to hold that green color a little bit better, hold up against that winter cold and that discoloration that happens in some conifers during the winter. But again, this plant's had some issues we've seen. And the one thing about it is most people don't need a screening plant that's 60 feet tall. And so what happens is they get 60 feet tall, they're a little thin at the bottom, so you can just see right through them. For a 6-foot person, not a very good screening plant. For a 60-foot person, very good screening plant. And what happens when they come over, they can take $1,000 to $1,500 a piece to remove them out of your garden, in the future. And so just keep that in mind. If you need something this big and you want, a big, I tend to think of, when I see a Leyland cypress by itself and it was grown with the intent of it being in just a big open space, it's like a giant Christmas tree, I'm always like, wow, what a beautiful tree. And they truly are beautiful, beautiful trees in that regard. When I see them lined up 6 feet apart, and they're 40 feet tall, I know that those conditions are the kind of conditions that end up with insect problems and disease problems and blowover problems and that kind of thing. So just pointing it out, Leyland cypress still widely available. They're not sold as much as they used to be by any stretch of the imagination, because they have had some issues over the years, and green giant arborvitae have taken the place. But what I'm recommending in this video as you're watching it is don't lean all into one thing. Because if you do lean all into one thing, when that one thing goes, you have no screen and you may have a very large bill cleaning it up. This is a really interesting screening plant or specimen plant. You can grow one of these on the corner of a foundation, or you can line a few of them up in your screen or in your mixed screen. This is a Hollywood juniper. These, gonna have kind of a mind of their own a little bit. I love the habit of these. This is great for coastal gardens, and just a lot of us can grow these. They're hardy for most people watching, and they kind of have a mind of their own. Sometimes they can look like they just got twisted in a circle in time. You know, where you take a branch like this and it turns and twists, and Tora lusa, it just twists around the plant in time and just become naturally really, really beautiful. And not a plant that I want to put in where I'm going to have to shear it a whole lot. So it really needs to be in a place where it can get large and it can do the thing that it does, which is become kind of a unique to itself upright plant. But it does become a pretty good screening plant in time. Where it looks a little thin and wispy here in this container, it actually does become quite full. I have seen these beside a building down at East Carolina University over 30 feet tall and probably 20 feet wide. I mean, really massive plants in the future. So keep that in mind. You could at some point, you know, shear them and cut them back some, but this one will need some space and time to become really one of the more interesting horticulture plant, you know, plants for ornamental horticulture. You know, it's not going to, each of them are going to have a kind of a mind of their own. Definitely more upright and narrow overall, but in time will eat a little bit of space. So keep that in mind. Okay. This is one of my favorite upright junipers. This is Blue Point juniper. Grew these for years in my nursery. We don't have a lot of choices for blue conifers in the South, and these are hardy in zone 4 to 9, so pretty much everybody watching can grow them. But we don't have a lot, again, as you get to zone 8 and 9, we really don't have a lot of options for having blue conifers. So this is a nice blue-ish selection, not as blue as Colorado blue spruce or anything, but definitely has a blue hue to it. What's nice about growing junipers as screening plants versus arborvitae? So let's flip over to emerald arborvitae and say that plant down in the Southeast is not happy in the heat. It's just really not overall happy in the heat, where junipers tend to gain drought tolerance in time and just tolerance to everything, to air pollution and to, you know, deer resistance and, you know, coastal issues and all kinds of things that other plants, you know, just don't tolerate as well. So, you know, consider using junipers if you have tougher conditions, or, you know, you're planning on planting a wall of conifers somewhere and you're not necessarily going to be able to get water to them easily. I'm probably going to go, you know, pick some of the junipers, that Hollywood juniper, Blue Point juniper, Taylor's juniper. Those are probably going to become more resistant to some of, you know, the abuse that we sometimes give our plants in the landscape, more than emerald arborvitae would. Here's another pretty common screening plant in the Southeast United States and out west as well. There's a couple other species that typically used in the West that are a little more drought tolerant, but this is Mackie Podocarpus, and if you go down to a place like Charleston, you'll see garden after garden after garden screened off with these because they have this super upright, narrow tendency on their own. You know, pretty much all of the growth is heading straight up. And so if the houses are really close together in super narrow spaces, this is a perfect screening plant for that. Really tough. Where we think of a lot of conifers as not being heat tolerant, this one's kind of the opposite. It's not very cold tolerant, and it's super heat tolerant, tolerant of coastal conditions and sandy conditions and just all kinds of conditions, as long as it doesn't get super cold during the winter time. New growth tends to be a little bit lighter than the old growth and creates an interesting contrast. Typically, we'll see these growing in part shade conditions down in Charleston, but they'll take lots of sun as well. We have one called Romeo at the house that has white foliage on it, but it's very slow growing in comparison to the solid green forms of Podocarpus. But this is Podocarpus Mackie. Again, it's just incredibly easy, upright, pretty fast growing evergreen hedging shrub. This is Black Dragon Cryptomeria. Cryptomeria is Japanese cedar, would be the common name for Cryptomeria. And this is a plant that we have very dwarfing versions of, and we probably, if you're following along with the channel back in Raleigh, we probably have 4 different varieties that stay less than, you know, we could keep less than 3 feet in height. And then there are Yoshino Cryptomeria that can get 80 feet in height, something like that. And then this one's called Black Dragon. This one's kind of an interesting, upright, narrow one. It can be sheared pretty tight. So this would be an example of one that's been sheared pretty tight. And then there's other examples here where they're a bit thinner. I'll see some space. Every one of these is different. So interesting specimen plant for the garden for sure. Be a little bit harder to make a good, this one would, it's in a low, going to be in a low screening video. This one will be a little harder though to make a full screen because again, the variability between each of them. But it's definitely a plant worth having because if you're just looking for not necessarily something you just can't completely see through, but you're looking for something that's tall and narrow and interesting, this is the plant for you. Okay, so these are just, every one of them is interesting and slightly different, but always upright and kind of narrow like this. Another surprisingly fast-growing screening plant here is Arizona cypress. When we see these in the wild out west, there can be kind of diminutive things out in the desert, but you bring them east, give them some water, and they can really take off in our landscapes. This one's blue ice, and I think it's a really great blue color, and we don't get a lot of this in our southern gardens where we can have great blue conifers like this. Carolina sapphire is probably the more known variety of these and tends to grow a little bit more Christmas tree-like, where blue ice can have a little bit its own imagination, just a little bit, I would say, where it doesn't necessarily go quite as uniform, but I do think it has a slightly bluer color, and I'm probably maybe making that up in my mind just a bit, but it's amazing that this desert dwelling plant, coming east, is such a good screening plant. We see the North Carolina Department of Transportation using these along the interstate in really tough slope spaces where there's no additional water happening on them. So a really great choice if you're trying to plant screening plants in an area that you're not necessarily going to be able to get water to them. Of course you can, the blue color is great as well. We have a neighbor though that's planted a Carolina sapphire blue Arizona cypress in front of their house, and it's basically eating the front of their house, and so be careful with this. This is probably not one to even put on a corner of a foundation. It's just going to get gigantic. Theirs is in the 25 to 30 foot range. It's literally eating the front of their house. So this is definitely one that goes out on the edge of your property, and you need to have a property that's sized to it a bit because it is going to end up 10 to 15 feet down at the bottom and another 30 to 40 feet in height. Not very often I shoot plants in the winter time, so we really get to see their winter splendor. This is Fire Chief arborvitae from the Southern Living Plant Collection. This one's really interesting because it turns this rust color during the winter time that's really quite vibrant. I don't know how well it'll show up here in the camera. And then as fast as it did this, as soon as the soil temperature hits maybe 60, 65 degrees, it'll flip really quickly. And it has this very vibrant, almost yellowish, I don't want to yellowish orange new growth on it during the growing season that's contrasted by this kind of lime green color that's always down in the bottom of it. That's part that's protected from the cold, still maintains this green during the winter time. This color will show up differently in different winters. So we've actually had real winter here. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina shooting this. And if you bring this above the ground and you have the roots exposed, you're basically one zone colder or so than we are. And then add to that we've actually had some actual cold this winter. They've actually fully colored up. So for us in the South, this may not put on quite this much color on a year-to-year basis, but what it does anyway, it'll just stay like this. So, you're not gonna lose either way. Great low mounding plant. You can keep this one anywhere between 2 to 4 feet in height, 2 to 4 feet in width. If you just let it go and let it become a ball over time, it'll go through 4 by 4, something like that. Soft textured. So it's not not prickly if you have to get in there and prune it or do any weeding around it or anything like that. But I thought I'd show off the winter color on it. I've got full video on the channel for this plant. And it's got a lot of great uses, but in the winter time, it turns this really cool, like fire engine color. I don't know what this color is called. Orange rust color, but it's super vibrant. Some of these rust colors that happen on some of these conifers are uninteresting or look like the plant is declining in some way. And this one actually just shows off when it fully colors up. This is Angelica blue juniper. This is not one I've actually covered on the channel before. It is one that I grew at my nursery occasionally. You can see this blue coloration in it. Shooting this in February, and it will have a much more bluer hue when all the new growth is coming out on it during the spring. But you can see the late season growth from last year still has that color in it. And then it has a slightly darker green color down in the plant. This one's kind of interesting because where would you grow this? This is going to get 5 feet tall and 10 feet wide, right? So there's not a whole lot of places for those dimensions of a plant. But folks do have banks and slopes where we can need to grow things on to stabilize the banks in place. It's going to be extremely drought tolerant. What I think of when I think of these junipers that get into that 4 to 5 foot range is I think about them using them as layers, where you can have the taller juniper up toward the top of the bank, and then you can layer down with lower ground covers as you get lower on the bank. So, and as you need to change from things that need it dry, because typically the top of a bank is going to be dry, as you get lower on the bank, you may need things that will take slightly wetter feet, and these junipers don't really particularly like wet feet. So that's my idea of layering this type of plant on a slope or a bank for folks who need that kind of thing. It's a low hedging size, so we could keep this narrower if we wanted to. We could probably, and you can see how these have actually been pruned here. You can actually box these off on the sides and allow them to get taller, or you could box them off on the top and keep them more ground cover like. So that's up to you. But if you were to just leave them alone, it's really a really vibrant blue color during the growing season that is super heat tolerant and drought tolerant, and again can be layered on a bank to give you some size differentiation and not just instead of trying to answer an entire problem with just one particular plant. Popping into the video real quickly, if you go over to our website, HortTube.com, we have t-shirts available, tickets to our open garden event. We have the Learn to Garden video series, which is literally teaching all about gardening, how to get started, how to make beds, how to pick plants, how to design, and then the weekly garden planner, which will help you maintain your garden on a week-by-week basis, literally a 52-week calendar during the year to teach you how to maintain your garden. So thank you guys very much for considering. I may have some really low-growing ground cover junipers in this video, but I'm going to give you the argument for growing Sargent's juniper, which is what this one is, as your ground cover juniper. This one actually gets 1 to 2 feet in height. Some of those other junipers you can keep 6 inches in height. But what I'll tell you about Sargent's is it is an incredibly tough plant. And some of those ground cover junipers, what they end up doing is collecting leaves and collecting debris, and where they don't like to be wet, they end up keeping themselves wet in the future because they mat down to the ground so tight that they end up giving themselves root rot issues and other issues. Whereas a lot of these junipers, and there are a bunch of them, Sargent's being one of the most well-known of them, junipers that get 1 to 2 feet in height tend to keep themselves drier. They're a little more air underneath them, that kind of thing. Just really great plants. The other thing about ground covers is it's nice to have different layers and different heights. So if you have a ground cover like this that's 1 to 2 feet in height, and then put one of the lower growing junipers next to that, or some other ground cover that will also take full sun, that would be, those height differentiations look great. And this one has a rich green color. And another thing I'd like to point out is I'm shooting this in February. And if you look back behind me, you can see, I don't know how much you'll be able to see of it, but all the other junipers here have turned all different kinds of other colors during the winter time. And these Sargent's junipers, they're not packed together. There's no cover in sight. They haven't been protected in any way, shape, or form, have held this rich dark green color year round. There's some people, it's super important to them that the garden kind of looks similar year round, and this is a plant that will do that. This is one we've covered several times on the channel over the years. This is all gold juniper. It's a shore juniper. Blue Pacific is one that you may know that has a bluish hue to it and grows very, very similar to all gold. But we really love all gold. This is a show off in the garden. And where I'm talking about maybe layering in this ground cover, when I'm talking about ground covers, doing different sizes and different, this allows you to have a really flat growing plant. This one's less than a foot tall and just as wide as you want to let it get ultimately. You can control the width, however you want to control the width. This one's going to be less than a foot tall. You could use something like Sargent's juniper behind it that stays green year round, that gets 1 to 2 feet tall. So it would contrast with it in size slightly and in color, and really allow the chartreuse color to pop on all gold. But we really love this plant. Full sun really, really shines. And then in the winter time, I found this plant really, really interesting because when the sun is on a low trajectory in the winter time, Any side that the sun is striking stays really yellow, and the other side loses a little bit of its color. It all ends up super bright during the summertime, but I've noticed this plant, if you were really thinking about orienting it toward the south, it really gets this crazy gold hue on it during the wintertime. This is Cryptomeria japonica radicans. Cryptomeria japonica is just Japanese cedar. There's all kinds of different ones of these, from very small growing little dome-shaped ones to little narrow, odd-looking ones, and all kinds of things. And then Yoshino Cryptomeria has been kind of the most common of the screening plant Cryptomeria for a long time. It gets gigantic, and I mean really gigantic, 75 feet tall, and really, really super wide. Radicans is slightly better version for most suburban screening that folks are doing, and this one more like 30 to 50 feet in height. Still big, quite big, right? But definitely on the narrower side than Yoshino overall. So probably as you're looking, if you were looking to include Japanese cedar in your screen, in your mixed border or whatever, Radicans, if you could find it, is probably a better choice than Yoshino for most people. They're just not going to need something that's 25 or 30 feet taller than this one gets. It's soft enough to the touch, so not wicked, to mess with. They tend to turn a little bit of an amber color in the worst of the winter, but most years in the deeper south they don't turn as much. You can see a little bit of that in a few of these 7-gallon containers, where just a little bit of amber color shows up in them. Definitely in colder areas, a little more of that, but really super, super easy, very fast growing screening plant. This is a brand new crop of columnar Hetz junipers, so don't judge it by what you're seeing right here in these containers. These are newly planted, but this is a really great upright, narrow juniper. There's a version called Glauca, which has a bit of a blue hue to it, and then this is the kind of richer green color, again, newly potted and newly fertilized, so not as green as it would be. But this is a great screening plant for most people watching. This is going to be full sun, tough conditions, an area that if it gets dry in between watering is going to be fine. Zones 4 to 9, really, really tough plant. These can reach somewhere, let's say 12 to 15 feet in height and maybe only 5 feet in width. And for most people, that's about a really good size screening plant. You don't necessarily need anything that's 30 feet or 40 feet in height. And so this is the perfect plant for that. They can also be sheared. So they can be sheared in the future to stay narrower. So if it's a great corner foundation plant, specimen plant, or in a mixed border. But I wanted to show these off, even though these is, again, these need a season to really start to fill out in these containers, but a really great, tough plant for most ornamental landscapes. Here's a crop of blue rug junipers. This is a very common ground cover juniper. Of course, the more sun, the better. Typically, we'll plant these on some sort of slope and allow them to kind of stay dry between waterings. It's called blue rug because you can see that growth towards the end of last season has that bluish hue to it. It carries that right through the winter. So it's kind of greener in the older growth and has a bluish hue to it in the newer growth. I've got a video on the channel all about ground cover junipers if you want to go and take a look at that. My buddy had this bank of blue rug junipers that are in that video that are just unbelievable. If you plant these and you're trying to cover a bank, make sure you plant them up toward the top, because most of the time they're just going to grow down the bank. It doesn't do you a whole lot of good to put a row right at the very bottom of the bank. But these are great. I would say that you need to get into them occasionally and make sure you're getting leaves out of them and trash and debris and anything that might grow into this, because they like to be dry, and a lot of times those leaves and things can build up in them over the years and end up keeping them wet in time because they mat down so heavily. This is Blue Pacific juniper. This is a pretty common juniper out in the trade. Gets a little bit taller than some of the other ground cover junipers, so maybe a foot tall in the future. But I like this juniper overall. I think it's tough in a lot of different, really tough plant in a lot of different conditions. It's pH tolerant, from 6 to 8. I mean, just, really wide range. So people that have alkaline soils are, they're from this is a native to Japan, not invasive in any way in the States. Great for holding a bank in place or slope in place. Has this really rich blue-green coloration to it. There's a gold version of this out on the trade as well that's, you know, very, very striking, and the two of them together would probably look really, really fantastic. I always say when I'm doing planting those banks, a lot of people are looking for like one particular plant to solve, you know, a slope. And this plant would do that for sure if you were looking for one plant in a full sun area to solve your slope related issue. But I like to plant different size ones. So I would take another juniper that's a little taller than this one and put it up near the top, and then have this one down below it, or have this one up at the top and maybe put blue rug or Bar Harbor or something like that down below where it stays lower. So you create some different height variations in it. This one does have a tendency to take on a little bit of an amber color during the winter time, although this, you know, this group right here I'm filming in February doesn't have much of that to show off. They just pruned these. They just came around and pruned every one of these. Normally I'd be showing you one. Normally they would be wide or outside of the top of this pot. But what you're seeing here is where they freshly prune them, and then they'll let them fill back out again, and then they'll send them out to retail. This is kind of the last pruning they'll probably do. This is a group of Parsons junipers. I grew lots and lots of these when I had my nursery. I like this one as a ground cover. As a ground cover juniper. It gets taller than some other ground cover junipers that we would use, where blue rug would stay, you know, less than a foot in height, and maybe Blue Pacific might get around a foot. Parsons is going to creep up more like 2 feet in height, but it tends to be, I feel like, longer lived. Some of those really tight to the ground cover junipers, they don't like wet feet, and they stay so close to the ground that they end up kind of keeping the ground wet in the future, and can be their own worst enemy. They're a little hard to clean up around, that kind of thing. So I've always liked Parsons. Parsons is also a little softer. All these junipers are a little prickly, but as junipers go, it's a little bit softer. So if you have to do any pruning on it, you can. These can get as wide as you want to let them get in the future, maybe 2 feet in height. If they try to creep up on you a little more than that, you can prune them, but you can, in the late winter, get after these pretty hard. Andorra compacta is another one. Another juniper that's a similar height and size to this, but Andorra turns this purple color in the wintertime, and Parsons tends to hold its green color. So for some people, they might like that change of color, and for others, they might like for it to stay green during the wintertime. But you can see it gets up to about this height and then starts to take off, you know, wider. That's Parsons juniper. This is a Podocarpus macrophylla called Emerald Flame. I think Ted Stevens was one of the first people who brought this back from Japan. It has pink new growth on it. So I'm filming this in February, and you can see the great texture of this plant. This is going to be a good screening plant in part shade conditions or sunny conditions, and reach somewhere between 8 and 10 feet in height. You know, some of the other Podocarpus like Mackie tend to be a little more vigorously upright and can get taller than that. But this one is similar to the one we have mood ring at the house, where this one has a pink new growth on it. It's kind of a burgundy-ish. It kind of goes through changeable colors on its way to this solid green. Of course, in the wintertime, as you can see, it's green like this. And again, we have that one at the house called Mood Ring that's in the Southern Living Plant Collection that has a similar habit, where they're going to be ultimately upright and pretty narrow and reach somewhere in the 8 to 10 foot range. But great plant, great textured plant. Here in the South, we don't have a lot of conifers that are really, really, really tough in the South, and this is a good example of one that is. May take a minute with this one, where Mackie and a couple others are just more initially rigidly upright. This Emerald Flame and the other one that we have, the Mood Ring, tend to be a little bit leggy on the way. I mean, not leggy, but kind of wispy on the way to ultimately being a very upright plant. There are a few named varieties out on the market for these Arizona cypress. This is Carolina Sapphire, might be the most common of them. It has a really nice it ends up being a really perfect Christmas tree, but it has kind of a softer look to it than Blue Ice, and which is the other pretty common one out on the market. These have an interesting odor when you disturb the foliage on them. Deer typically don't eat them, but I've said that before, and then a couple people said that deer did mess with theirs. So you know, I sometimes avoid saying that altogether because everybody's deer are different. These are very fast growing. This is a new crop, so these 7 gallons they'll grow 2 feet in these containers in the next few months. As we're shooting this in February, just April, and these will really get going. These are native to the Southwest United States. And you would think that a lot of those southwestern native plants wouldn't like our conditions, our humid, rainy conditions here in the southeast United States, but that's the opposite. These things just grow like crazy. We see the North Carolina Department of Transportation using these on the side of the interstate because they're so drought tolerant, but then they also tolerate those wetter conditions that we can get occasionally. Again, soft to the touch, interesting foliage smell, beautiful blue-green color like this. And this is February, so it doesn't change color in the winter time. It kind of keeps the color year-round, where a lot of conifers can be changeable seasonally in how they look, from green to rusty colors and that kind of thing. But this would be great in any kind of mixed border screen, but you got to have some room. This is going to be a 50-foot tall thing that's ultimately going to be 15 feet wide. We've got a neighbor that planted one in front of their house, and it's just literally eating the front of their house. So probably not a great corner foundation plant, and more of a slightly larger lot screening plant. This is a Spartan juniper. This one is really great for heat tolerance and just tough conditions overall. So these will take full sun. And are hardy in zone like 4 to 9. So pretty much like almost everybody watching this video can grow this plant. Very rigidly upright. So this is a new crop of 3-gallon Spartan junipers here. So they're a little on the small side, and they've still got them pot to pot, but they'll space these in the next week or two. And then, as we're filming this in February, and they'll fill out a little bit more at the bottom and gain a little bit more height before they send them off to retail. These plants, I think one of the things that makes Spartan great is if, in a mixed border screen or using 3 or 5 of these as part of your screen, you can create kind of a formal look. These will all grow like soldiers, basically. A lot of these screening plants, you need to do a little bit of work on them to have them be copies of one another. But this one is great for a formal garden, so the edge of some sort of formal garden. Ultimately reach about 15 feet in height, maybe 5 feet in width, but you could shear it a bit to keep it a little bit narrower than that. It'll bronze a little bit in the winter time, or turn kind of a purplish hue in colder areas. We're filming this in South Georgia, so despite the fact that it's winter, it hasn't off-colored all that much. They don't get that much cold on them. But I've always liked this plant just because I can plant it in a container, and that's what it'll do. No work had to be done from the time this was a rooted cutting until now to have it look like that and be that narrow. So there you go, that's Spartan juniper. This is an Italian cypress, and this is the way they grow. This is a Mediterranean plant. We think of Mediterranean plants as things like rosemary and other plants that like to be in fairly arid conditions, fairly dry conditions, definitely drying out between rains and waterings and that kind of thing. And so we'll see tons of Italian cypress as we get out west. Once you get past the middle Texas and down into the desert Southwest, you see them just all over the place growing, because it's an easy plant for them to grow, and doesn't have to adapt to that climate, that Mediterranean climate of California. But then they do perfectly fine in the Southeast as well. And if you followed our channel, when we go down to Ram and Tom Giberson's garden, she's got a couple of paths there framed in these big, beautiful Italian cypress that she's, probably had in the ground for a couple of decades now. Not the fastest growing thing in the world, but ultimately will end up 40, 50, 60 feet in height, something like that, and still only, this big around, when it gets to that height. Make sure you're selecting one that's pretty rigidly upright when you're planting them. If you're in an area that can be exposed to wind, you may need to do a little bit of staking on them early on. But really, really great plants. Not a plant you're going to put in a wet space. So as soon as you hear Mediterranean plant about any plant, you immediately know, if you're trying to grow that thing in the Southeast, that it's not going to like to stay wet between rains and watering. So put it in an area that dries out, in between rain events, and definitely worth a shot. Not everybody in the Southeast with our rain and humidity is going to be able to grow them, but maybe you have a spot. And when you see one of these, they're just unique in every way. And you can, when you're driving around an area where a lot of them are planted, you can see them over the houses, in the distance, all over the place. And it is truly, truly a unique plant. Here's a crop of fairly newly planted Globosa nana cryptomeria. This is a dwarf, roundish growing cryptomeria, although it can creep up to 6 feet in height in time. It's easy to keep this one 3 to 4 feet in height and 3 to 4 feet in width, something like that. Great foundation plant. I think this was a really tough southern conifer too. I'm in Florida filming this, and so we don't have a tremendous amount of conifers that do really well in the southeast, especially when you're this far south. But cryptomeria or Japanese cedars are in that group. There are Japanese cedars that get 80 feet tall and Japanese cedars that get a foot tall. And this one is a dwarf one, again, though, that will, you know, I think a lot of people are going to plant this and want to keep it about 3 feet in height. If you don't prune it, it's going to just keep adding because it doesn't read the tag, and it's just going to keep growing up and about equally as wide as tall. So if it's 3 feet tall, it's going to be 3 feet wide. This thing grows. They don't have to prune these at all. It's just a matter of rooting them, potting them, and waiting, because they'll fill in any direction that they're not full already and just become a perfect round ball, basically. Really great. This is a really great plant, but for folks that want something that's neat looking all the time and wanting something that will give a different texture, you know, to leafy evergreens and other flowering things, and then something that's the same year round. These will turn in colder areas. You'll get a little bit of bronzing on them during the winter time, but they resist it more than a lot of other conifers and typically stay more green, like this one is, you know, as we're filming this in February. But Globosinana, great plant. And again, I think it works really well in those folks that want something that's year round, kind of the same. And then they can, in front of that, do things that maybe go to sleep or go to ground in the winter time or lose their leaves or whatever. This is Yoshino cryptomeria. This is a Japanese cedar that's lots and lots of them out in the world because it's very fast growing screening plant. It's kind of soft to the touch. Lots of course, you know, these large growing conifers are used for screening between houses, and you know, they're best suited for larger lots though. Things like Leyland cypress and green giant arborvitae and Yoshino cryptomeria. There are some slower growing or narrower upright Japanese cedars as well. Radicans comes to mind, but Yoshino has been the most common one for a long time. It's filming this in February, and you can get a bit of this, get a little bit of amber color in it during the winter time. But for the most part, this one will keep its color here in the south. These get big, and 70 feet plus probably in time. Beautiful bark on them. And the way I know they have beautiful bark is when they get 70 feet tall, they lose their bottom limbs and you can see right through them, but they're beautiful. So I really think, you know, a lot of folks don't necessarily need something to get 70 feet tall. They're just looking for something that's fast growing. So it may be worth waiting a little bit of time to not end up with something that gets so big that, you know, these will get 20 feet at the bottom in width and, you know, 60, 70 feet tall. I actually prefer them as just kind of individuals, you know, where you grow them for the beauty of that bark and the soft foliage and, you know, it's just a beautiful plant, just a beautiful conifer that can be just as a one of a kind. If you have a large yard where you can really show one of these off. But people do line them up as soldiers along the edge of their properties, and they get very big. Eventually, they'll have to be underplanted with something in the future. You know, in the long run, they'll need something planted down toward the bottom to actually have the screen be, you know, in the bottom 10 feet or so of the plant. Again, I'm not knocking these. Just a lot of times I see places where these very, very large growing conifers get planted, and they're not necessarily in the best spots for that. But certainly, if you have a very large property, you know, this is a very fast growing conifer. It'll start off maybe grow 6 inches the first year and a foot the second year and 2 feet the third year, and then get to the point where it's probably growing 3 and 4 feet in a single season once it gets going and get rooted out into the surrounding soil. But this is Yoshino cryptomeria. Here's a Cephalotaxis called Utopia. This one's in the Southern Living Plant Collection. This is a Cephalotaxis that'll reach 3 feet in height, maybe 3 to 4 feet in height, something like that. Wider growing Cephalotaxis. Really great, rich, dark green color on this. Cephalotaxis is not taxis. It's not you. It just means you like. So Cephalotaxis. They're pretty soft to the touch. They look like they'd be absolutely wicked, but they're actually pretty soft to the touch. And we'll show these Cephalotaxis as they're ground cover ones. They're fastigiate varieties. Lots of interesting ones. We've shown one called Hedgehog, and we've shown Duke Gardens, and we've shown lots of these over the years because they're just workhorses in a park shade garden, especially in dry shade conditions. There's just nothing that outperforms these. And they stay this green color year round, really super, super low maintenance plants in the garden. I think we planted 5 of these in that 5-part landscape job we did. And then we revisited them and shot the video for this plant that's on the Garden Plants channel. And the thing is just, they're just fantastic, really fantastic ornamental plants, and the deer don't eat them. So when we think of ewes or just straight taxus, deer will eat them, but they tend to avoid the cephalotaxis. This is Highlights arborvitae from the Southern Living Plant Collection, or Thuja occidentalis Highlights. This is an eastern arborvitae that has this amazing new chartreuse foliage on it, and incredibly resist burning even in warmer areas or bleaching. A lot of times these chartreuse color or lime green colored new growth conifers, during the heat of the summer, they tend to bleach a bit. And I'm filming this right at the beginning of October. And this thing has gone through an entire, now 3 seasons in pretty tough conditions, 10 hours of direct sun on it here in zone 8A in Raleigh, North Carolina, without bleaching, and just looking fantastic here in the garden. These are hardy in zone 5 to 8, but probably more cold hardy than that, probably more like zones 4 to 8. More sun, the more fuller the plant is. It has this upright, narrow habit on it, but we do keep the ground well mulched. We're making sure we're watering our conifers in abnormally dry times, because they're not great at letting us know that they're dry. And so we're making sure if we water it, we're thoroughly watering it and then letting it drain out there. This one again is an upright, narrow growing habit. Thuja occidentalis can be sheared into boxwood like plants, really. So you could keep this 6 to 8 feet in height permanently if you wanted to, by shearing it once a year in the late winter a bit to keep it that size. But if you just let it go, this one's probably going to reach 20 feet in height, maybe 4 or 5 feet in width. Really great corner foundation plant, good container plant for a few years. Great in a mixed border. I typically recommend using different types of plants to create your screen from your neighbor, just in case any plant in your screen has a problem, you don't lose your entire screen. But really great ornamental plant. We have found it to be incredibly sun tolerant and heat tolerant here in our southern garden, and look forward to it growing the rest of the way up the corner foundation in the future. This is Frankie Boy arborvitae, or you'll see it listed as Thuja orientalis or Platycatus orientalis is the Latin names for it. This was a seed selection from Austria, normally with Thuja orientalis. You'll see, like, it's basically little plates surrounding, on the outside. It's really interesting growth habit these have, but this one has this like filament style growth, right, in this weeping form. It's really quite striking. It's got yellow new growth that kind of settles into a chartreuse green in the center. Frequently, you would purchase this as a really tight form. There's a lot of pruning that normally goes into these to keep them really tight and compact. But we just like this kind of free form look that it has. I like the red stems on it. I like being able to see it. That little bit of extra pruning, though, if you are keeping it in that tighter habit, will probably encourage some additional growth. So you'll see more of this yellow on it throughout the year. Great 12-month plant. I like it in this loose form because it kind of blows around in the wind a bit. Ultimately, it'll reach about 6 feet tall in 15 to 20 years, something like that. 10 to 15 years, let's say. 6 feet tall, 4 feet wide. I could shear it much closer than that. These Asian species of arborvitae tend to be more heat tolerant. So this is hardy in zone 5 to 9, where you may see like our native eastern arborvitae being hardy in 3 to 7 or 3 to 8. So much more heat tolerant, and then definitely full sun. Full sun's going to give you the most color, and these really hold up well in the full sun, even in the south. So this one's getting 8-9 hours of direct sun. We keep the weeds away from it. It's in well-drained soil. We keep it mulched, water it when it becomes abnormally dry. And this is a really great plant that's so interesting and not a lot of other people would have, and everybody will want to know what it is when they see it in the garden, especially when it's actively growing and it has more of this kind of gold coloration on the outside of it. But this is Frankie Boy arborvitae. This is a Cypress obtusa called Verdoni, a really neat pyramidal shaped gold conifer. So it's soft to the touch like we would expect from other false cypresses like this, and kind of has a bit of a contorted, interesting new growth habit on it, where in all the new foliage there has this kind of chartreuse coloration to it. Ultimately, again, kind of a pyramidal habit on this one, so it might get 8 feet in height and 5-6 feet in width. Ultimately, you could probably control that width just a bit on this plant. It's going to be slow growing, especially to start, and then probably pick up a little bit in time. These are not going to be as heat tolerant, so whereas I think most Cypress obtusa, we could definitely say they're going to be hardy in zone 4 to 7 for sure. In zone 8, I think we're going to have to give this just a little bit of afternoon protection. We need to get some direct sun on it so we can get this gold color on it. Otherwise, it'll be green if it's in too much shade. But in zone 8, I think you're going to want to protect it up in zone 8 in the Pacific Northwest. No problem at all. They can you know, where it doesn't get quite as hot, it won't be an issue. But for us, midsummer, you know, in zone 8, it might be a little bit hot for them. This is a great plant, and I love all of these false cypresses because, again, they're soft to the touch. Most of these aren't great at letting us know they're dry, so if you are putting them in a hotter area of the country, make sure you're watering them when it's abnormally dry. This is a fastigiate plum yew. This one is going to be for part shade or even shade conditions, and this is really pretty much a southern conifer. So we think about a lot of conifers being not as heat tolerant as others, but the plum yews are. There's ground cover plum yews, mid-sized growing plum yews, and then there's this fastigiate plum yew. And I think a lot of people probably have a spot on their foundation next to a door that's shady or part shade, corner space that's like that. Maybe a place where you're trying to build a little bit of a screen in a part shade, you know, border area along your garden. Not going to be the fastest growing thing in the world for sure, but it will ultimately get 8-10 feet tall, end up wider than this for sure in time, but you can control the width, and you can see it definitely wants to go vertical like this. Really just a great plant, really again, tough southern conifer. You know, these probably only grow a few inches a year when you first put them in the ground, but ultimately they will pick up a bit in time. I think they're hardy in zone 6 to 9. If you're in zone 6, though, you probably don't want to put it out on the edge of your property as a screening plant on the edge. I would probably have it in a more protected space. As you go further south, definitely more and more out in open space as a screen. This is kind of a fun one. This is Cypress obtusa gracilis, otherwise known as slender hinoki cypress. This one grows very fastigiate, upright, if it's allowed to. It can be, if it ever gets top pruned, you know, if you start pruning on the top of it, it will get wider. So I've seen them a little bit wider, but if you just let this thing grow, it becomes this very unusual, almost like telephone pole like growth on it in the future. Just like other Cypress obtusas, it's soft to the touch. All these false cypresses, so they kind of play nice in our gardens. This one's hardy in zone 4 to 8. In zone 8, it probably would appreciate not being in sun for 15 hours in July. So if you can put it where it'll get a lot of morning sun, early afternoon sun, and late day shade, that's probably beneficial overall to these. But I just think it has one of the more interesting growth habits for conifers. And again, this one's, it can become kind of a screening plant, but not super full. Be a great corner addition to a foundation planting, and or just as a a standalone super interesting piece where you just leave it alone, see what it does. If you planted 5 of these, you wouldn't get 2 that looked alike. If you just let them go and let them do their thing and become kind of whatever it does, it does. This is a cephalotaxis called hedgehog, and this is one of Steph's absolute favorite plants. It has such interesting character to it. I think on tags you're going to see this one gets 3 to 4 feet in height, and in these 15-gallon containers, they're kind of already about 3 to 4 feet in height. So from here, they just kind of weep out and go a little bit wider in time. So this is about the most vertical growth you'll have on it. Then it can be, the width can be controlled in the future. This is one of the best dry shade plants you can have, and a great conifer for the south. So these are hardy in zone 6 to 9. And there's probably very few really great gardens we see in the southeast if you go in the shady areas that you're not going to see these cephalotaxis being used, because they're a plant that just doesn't need anything from you, and they show off year round, and they give a good backdrop to maybe other perennials and things that go to sleep in the winter time. Just perfect little plants. And the thing with these is there's ground cover cephalotaxis, and then there's mid-sized ones like this that probably 4 feet-ish and a little wider than that, and then ones that get tall and narrow as well. So you could just pick the one that kind of fits the space. And again, they're tolerant of dry shade. And when we think about gardening in the shade, you really need to know whether you have kind of moist shade conditions, because this plant's not going to like wet shade, or do you have kind of dry shade conditions where you've got existing trees and that kind of thing. This is the perfect plant for that. Here's some sea green junipers that these have kind of been turned into like poodles at this point. Beautiful specimen plant here that you can, a lot of these junipers can, you can do interesting things to them like this, but typically you're going to see sea green juniper in like a 1 or 3 gallon pot. It's could typically be used as a ground cover or a low hedging plant. Ultimately, this one can get about 4 feet in height and about as wide as you want to let it get. So it can get 6 or 8 feet in width. Pretty much everybody watching can grow this plant. They're hardy in zone 4 to 9. Really tough ornamental plants, coastal conditions, drought conditions, a lot of things going for this plant. And I like when I would do junipers on a bank, as I would use something like sea green up toward the top and use a slightly taller growing juniper up near the top, and then a lower growing one down at the bottom. And I thought it created some sort of contrast rather than trying to solve the bank with one plant, using two and using slightly different. You can get slightly different texture between the junipers. You can get slightly different coloration in the foliage as well. This one holds its color really, really well, pretty much for everybody. It stays really vibrant green through the winter time. Just a great plant. And again, you can get them that have been done as upright, pom-poms and all kinds of interesting things that you can do to these. You can bonsai this particular one, but ultimately I think it's really well suited for dry sloped conditions where you're looking to hold a bank in place, not mow it anymore, lower your overall garden maintenance. This is Cypress piscifera, baby blue ice. This is a really neat, soft to the touch, blue foliage conifer that has a pyramidal habit. This one is, if you know boulevard cypress can get quite big, but upright and narrow. This is a sport of it. And it's kind of a slow to moderate grower. You're going to see on the tag, it might say it gets 3 to 4 feet in height, but ultimately there's no off switch on this. It ultimately can get 6 or 8 feet in time, but it's going to be on the narrow side. Beautiful blue foliage, soft textured, really interesting plant. It doesn't take up a whole lot of space, and so everybody's going to have a spot in their garden for something that's upright and narrow like this. Really going to add some year-round interest. Actually shooting this in between Christmas and New Year's, real show off in the winter garden. We use things like this throughout our garden where we have a lot of perennials and a lot of annuals. So in the winter time, we have this type of thing that really shows off. It can be used as a container plant, a little low growing hedge. I don't trust some of these conifers in really dry conditions, so I give them they don't let you know very well. They'll just start thinning in the middle quite a bit if you're not watering them. So even an established baby blue ice like this, I'm going to give it some ongoing water if it becomes abnormally dry. They like slightly acid soils, really super low maintenance plants. Can be sheared tight as you want to shear it. Again, we'll take something like this and leave it in a container for a couple of years, and then we'll transition it into the garden after that. So a lot of different uses for it, and I think this is one of those kind of plants that we're looking for in our Raleigh, North Carolina garden for just year-round interest in the garden. These are hardy in zone 4 to 8. Zone 4, full sun. By the time you get down to zone 8, you probably want them in a little bit of shade. Would be kind of ideal for these. But this is baby blue ice Cypress. This is Cypress obtusa Shiraman, or Shiraman Hinoki cypress. Really interesting, upright, fastigiate growing Hinoki cypress that has this really crazy crinkly growth on it. Kind of considered a slow grower, but for us it's actually put on about a foot of growth. The first year it was in the ground. You'll see this listed at maybe 4 feet tall and 2 feet wide, but ultimately it's going to get bigger. The plants don't read the tags, and so I've seen it 6, 7 feet in the ground before, and I think it'll probably would grow 10 feet and 3 feet wide if you just let it. But it could be, you could do some controlled pruning on it. Really super low maintenance plant. Great specimen plant, can be bonsai'd, so you can take and manipulate this plant all over the place if you wanted to. Really extremely low maintenance. Likes well-drained soil, so make sure it's in an area that's okay if it stays moist, but definitely not wet. That would be a bad idea. More sun, the better. Hardy in zone 4 or 5 to zone 8. Zone 4, 5, 6, 7, more sun, the better. I'm in zone 8 with this thing, and we have it in a space where it's getting some afternoon shade. So it's full sun in the morning till midday, and then we have it in late day shade. So as you're in hotter and hotter areas, a little late day shade's probably ideal for this plant. Very, very low maintenance. We're fertilizing it once in the late winter with an organic fertilizer, and that's pretty much it. If it had a crazy limb on it, I could cut it off whatever time of the year, really. If I needed to do general pruning on it, I'd do that in the late winter. Deer resistant, rabbit resistant. Just a great focal point piece. Would also work great as a container plant, as a really, a thriller in the middle of a container with other things planted around it, and it can stay in that container pretty much year round. So it's great year-round interest from this Shiraman Hinoki cypress. This is an interesting juniper, an upright juniper called Troutman. This is the perfect plant for those who want an Italian cypress in colder areas. So it has that blue-green coloration, the really rigidly upright habit. Not quite as much as Italian cypress, but you can certainly shear this thing to have it look somewhat like that. Really great, again, great blue-green foliage on it. Hardy in zone 4 to 8, so again, quite a bit more cold hardy than Italian cypress. And it has, this one's one, and I can look up this row and kind of see that you're not going to get 10 of them to look exactly alike though, like you would with Italian cypress. They're all going to have a little bit of character, a little bit of mind of their own. Great corner foundation plant. Great as part of your mixed border screen. Perfect specimen plant. Pretty soft to the touch. A lot of junipers can really bite you back, but Troutman's one I'm always drawn to. Anytime I see this one in a nursery setting or in a garden anywhere, it's just such a neat ornamental plant. This is Cedrus atlantica glauca pendula, which is a weeping Cedrus atlantica. Cedrus atlantica is one of the actual species of cedar. Again, I think there's like 4 actual species of cedar, and then a lot of things we call cedar that happen to be junipers or whatever. This is a super interesting plant, and again, these are in like 15-gallon containers, and they have been contorted in all different directions. So they're super interesting as you're buying it. You can buy these in smaller containers, probably around Christmas time at a garden center, and then create your own thing that you want to do with it. So these can be allowed to go straight up, and then they have just kind of a mind of their own, weeping pieces coming off the side of them. They can be sheared a bit to keep them a little bit fuller. They can be trained in basically almost torturous forms like this. And then we actually have one in the neighborhood that someone's working on, having it be almost like a tunnel, where you can create a piece that comes all the way over the top and down. So you could just, if you had something over a gate or something like that, you could just train it over that gate over the long run. It has this great blue-green coloration in it, and again, this is very, very heat tolerant in the garden. I think these are hardy in zone 6 to 9, something like that. But again, a plant with a lot of character. This is a Cephalotaxis called Duke Gardens, and it was actually discovered at Duke Gardens in Durham, North Carolina, as a sport of fastigiata. And this is a really compact form of this plant, and you can keep this one 2 by 2 if you want to in your garden, or maybe up to 4 by 4 in the future. Really nice growth habit on it. Starting to put on some new growth here at the beginning of April, which is always super, super showy. These are fairly soft to the touch. They're dry shade tolerant. This is a male. Duke Gardens is only male, and so you're not going to get the fruit on them. If you've ever seen the fruit on the plum yew, it's super, super interesting. But this one's not going to have that, but it has this great, super compact habit. And probably everybody has this part shade or shade spot where they need something that's compact and low growing and is drought tolerant and kind of an easy plant in the shade that you don't have to do a whole lot of worrying about. You know, if you get leaves drop on it in the fall, you pull those off, you fertilize this thing once in the spring, and you know, with an organic fertilizer, and that's about the maintenance you'll have to do to this. If it gets a little wider or taller than you want, you can shear it in the late winter, early spring, and then it'll put on all this super, super interesting, soft new growth during the growing season. This is Cedrus deodora, otherwise known as deodar cedar. This is actually one of the actual cedar species. This one comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes, and we have one called Feeling Blue in our garden. It's a kind of a weeping form that can be kept as kind of a crawly ground cover or limbed up a bit into an interesting habit. So there's a lot of these on the market that you can get, and then this is the straight species, and it can get quite big. So I think a lot of people buy these because, I mean, it's a beautiful kind of soft textured blue, slightly blue hue, a good portion of the year. Beautiful conifer. Sometimes you'll see them really tightly sheared into Christmas tree shapes. And then they get planted in gardens and they become quite big. There's a couple on NC State's campus that are, you know, tipping 50, 60 feet in height and as much as 30, 40 feet in width. And in the wild, they can get 100 feet tall or more, become real giants. There's a few in the neighborhood that are just absolutely massive, massive trees. They're beautiful. What tends to happen in our area is the top dies out of them at some point, and then they get really interesting growth habits after that. You know, somewhere up in that 30-foot range, they tend to, you know, kind of lose their heads somehow. Maybe it's ice or cold or something like that that causes it. And then again, they get super interesting habits. But this is a plant that a lot of people are going to buy as a screening plant, you know, and line them up in some way. And then they're going to become trees in time. So keep that in mind. I think it probably lends itself to more of a specimen tree and in a large lot. If you have a large lot, this is such a fantastic tree to use, but not necessarily in our neighborhood where the lots are smaller. These trees can come to dominate the entire lot. And there's a couple of houses like that in the neighborhood. So super, super interesting. Love this plant. I think it definitely has a place, but probably if you're drawn to this soft textured blue conifer like this, there are deodar cedars that have been selected and are sports of this that are interesting, weeping habits and that kind of thing. This is a Thuja occidentalis called De Groot's Spire, and I grew this one for years. It's a really interesting plant. It's similar to emerald arborvitae, which is available literally, it seems like everywhere. This one is a little less available, but I think it has probably a little more usefulness overall than emerald because it stays overall narrower. So it has a little more upright, narrow habit than emerald arborvitae does. A little less soft textured. I mean, it's still super soft to the touch, but emerald has, you know, is really, really soft textured. They can get, you know, I've seen these as tall as 18 feet or so, but typically, you know, in gardens, we'll see these over about a 10-year period of time, probably around 12, 14 feet, something like that, with a narrow habit. They can be sheared to be really narrow, but even if it's not sheared, it's going to be 15 feet tall and 4 feet wide, something like that. These are native to the Northeast United States and up into Canada and the high mountains in North Carolina and Virginia, but not as heat tolerant as some others. So people in zone 4, 5, 6, these are going to be fantastic. By the time you get into zone 7B and 8A, they will grow there, but you need to keep an eye on watering them. We see rows of emerald arborvitae and other upright Thuja occidentalis just drop, you know, every third one dying in rows when in super hot summers like we had last year, where we went an extended period of time without water. Top couple inches gets dry, you need to water this plant for sure. This one's got a little bit of thinning on the interior. This is kind of normal in the fall. I like to point some things out in these little short videos like this occasionally, that if you see that interior thinning a little bit in the fall, that's pretty normal. The new growth will come out in the spring and cover it right back up. But they do have some gray owl junipers, and this one has this amazing blue-green color year-round. And I would put this one almost in the small shrub category. It will spread more than it will come upright, but it ends up, you know, when I see it in the landscape in that 3 to 4 foot range, and does that on its own. Really don't have to do anything to this plant other than you'll probably have to bring it in a bit, you know, because it will try to get wider than tall. But this is really great, super drought tolerant, and honestly underused plant for this beautiful coloration. It's going to be great color contrast. It's going to be great texture contrast with the other things that you're using in your landscape. But again, we could argue whether this one's a ground cover or a low shrub. I'm going to go with low shrub. Another great medium-sized shrub that I've got some experience with is this nightlight Chamaecyparis. This is a Southern Living Plant Collection piece. This one on the tag says 4 to 5 feet by 4 to 5 feet, and that's what it looks like it will be doing over the next few years. Right now, it's been in the ground for about right at 2 years, probably at this point, maybe not quite. And it's reached, you know, 2.5 by 2.5. It has never been touched by any pruning shears. It just grows in this perfect round ball. Very, very heat tolerant for a Chamaecyparis or a false cypress. Super impressed with this plant. It's, you know, I'm shooting this in September. It's got a tiny bit of bleaching on the top that you would see on a lot of gold conifers by late summer, but it's only a tiny bit, and it's been in the full sun all summer here in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is a plant I recommend a lot when I'm doing consultations. This is a Taylor's juniper. Almost everybody watching this video can grow this plant. This one can reach 30 feet in height ultimately, and to be super, super narrow. Think of it as a slightly wider Italian cypress with a blue-green foliage. This is a great replacement here in where it's hotter for something like emerald arborvitae that tends to be heat stressed a little more, but I think this is one of the, it's just a perfect plant if you have a super narrow space that you're trying to create a screen. If your house is right next door to another house and the screen porches are on the same side of the house and you have that super narrow spot, Taylor's juniper is a good choice for that. All of these conifers, you're going to plant them and they're not going to grow very quickly to start with. Once this thing gets going though, it can put on a, you know, 1 to 2 feet in a single season in the future. But beautiful blue-green conifer with a super narrow habit and basically zero maintenance.